You can run, but you can't hide forever. The words lingered in the damp air of the apartment hallway, a whisper that cut through the silence. Olivia James froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She was used to running, had been doing it for as long as she could remember. From bad relationships, from debt collectors, from the crushing weight of life itself. But this time, the chase was different. The voice behind her wasn't just anyone. It belonged to Vincent Gambino, a man whose name she had heard whispered in fear her whole life. A man who had more power than she could ever imagine. And now, as she reached the door of her apartment, his words made her realize something she couldn't deny: she was out of places to run. Olivia turned, her fingers trembling as she gripped the doorknob. The cold metal sent a chill up her spine. She had thought she could escape, that if she just kept moving, kept pretending that everything was fine, she'd outrun him. But Vincent Gambino had other plans. She had no idea how he had found her, or how he had known where she lived. The apartment was supposed to be a safe haven, a place to hide from the chaos that had followed her for years. Yet, now, it felt more like a trap. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the past few days. Her father's debts had finally caught up with her. She had tried to shield him from the consequences, but that was a battle she could never win. The Mafia had come to collect, and Vincent, with his icy blue eyes and ruthless charm, had decided that Olivia would pay the price for her father's mistakes. "I told you, Olivia," his voice was calm now, almost soothing, as he stepped closer. "You belong to me now. I always find what belongs to me." The word sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. Vincent had been playing this game for a long time, and he never lost. Olivia wanted to protest, to tell him that she wasn't his, that she was no one's to claim. But something in his gaze told her that she was already trapped. She had crossed a line the moment she stepped into his world, and now there was no going back. "You can't. Just take me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't have a choice." The words hit her like a slap. Vincent took another step forward, closing the distance between them. His presence was overwhelming, his power palpable in the air around him. He wasn't just a mafia boss, he was a force of nature, and Olivia was nothing more than a pawn in his game. She could feel his gaze on her, assessing, calculating, as if she were already his. "You'll learn soon enough," he said, his voice low and steady. "What it means to belong." Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she realized the weight of his words. She had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was certain: her life would never be the same again. Olivia's heart raced as Vincent's words echoed in her mind. "You belong to me now." She had heard them, but in that moment, they felt more like a sentence than a promise. She could still feel the cold metal of the doorknob beneath her trembling fingers, the last barrier between her and a life she could barely understand. He wasn't just a man, he was an empire wrapped in a tailored suit, with power so vast, it seemed to stretch beyond the limits of her imagination. Her breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned to face him, unable to look away from his piercing blue eyes. "I never thought this would happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if speaking too loud might shatter the delicate web of control she was desperately trying to maintain. Vincent stepped closer, the silence between them thick and heavy. His presence was undeniable, his aura commanding. "You're not meant to think, Olivia. You're meant to feel," he said softly, as if explaining something simple, something fundamental. His words hit her like a wave, overwhelming and deep, as though she had been cast into a sea of unspoken rules and expectations she didn't know how to navigate. Her legs felt weak, but she refused to let him see that. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Not yet. She straightened, forcing herself to breathe, to stand her ground. "I'm not one of your possessions," she managed to say, her voice firmer now, though the uncertainty in her chest remained. Vincent's lips curled into a smile, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His gaze never left hers as he slowly took a step forward, closing the space between them. Olivia could feel the heat radiating off him, an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Possession is a funny thing, he mused, his voice low and thoughtful. We don't always choose it. Sometimes, it chooses us. The weight of his words pressed down on her, but she refused to let him win. I don't care what you think. You can't control me. The words sounded more confident than she felt. Vincent studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her every word. Then, without warning, he reached out and placed a hand on her arm. The contact was light, but it sent a shiver through her. You're already in this world, Olivia, he said quietly, his voice almost soothing. There's no going back. The truth of it hit her like a punch to the gut. He was right. She had been thrust into this life whether she liked it or not. And now, she had to figure out how to survive it. As his hand lingered on her arm, she wanted to pull away, to break free, but something in her held her back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something else, something deeper that she wasn't ready to confront. The moment stretched on, filled with unspoken tension, until Vincent finally removed his hand. Come with me, he said, his voice commanding once more. Let's start this the right way. Olivia's mind screamed at her to refuse, to fight back, to run. But her body didn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the ground, caught in the gravity of his gaze. She couldn't escape. Not yet. She had no idea what was to come, but she knew one thing for sure, her life had changed forever the moment he had stepped into it. Olivia's heart raced as Vincent led her through the massive doors of his mansion. Every step felt like a weight pressing her deeper into this world she had never asked for, a world she now had no choice but to accept. She couldn't believe how quickly her life had spiraled. Just days ago, she was working 2 jobs, struggling to make ends meet, and now she was here, in this lavish home, caught in the web of a man who had made it clear she belonged to him. As they walked through the grand hallway, Olivia's eyes darted around, taking in the opulence, the polished marble floors, the towering ceilings, the paintings on the walls that looked like they belonged in a museum. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the man beside her. Vincent Gambino wasn't just any mafia boss. He was someone who controlled everything he touched, someone who wasn't used to hearing the word no. And Olivia had already learned that saying no to him wasn't an option. They reached a large study at the end of the hall, where Vincent stopped and turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, his eyes cold, yet there was something almost magnetic about him. Olivia wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Sit, he said, his voice calm, but the command was undeniable. She hesitated for only a moment before sitting down in the plush leather chair opposite him. Vincent took the seat behind the massive oak desk, folding his hands in front of him as he studied her. I don't like wasting time, Olivia, he said, his voice smooth and deliberate. You're here because I've decided you belong to me. Now, we both need to figure out what that means. Olivia felt a rush of frustration, but she held it in check. She had learned the hard way that showing weakness around him was a mistake. I'm not your possession, she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor she could feel deep inside. Vincent leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing on his lips. That's where you're wrong, he said softly. You are my possession now. And whether you like it or not, we both have to come to terms with that. Olivia opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips. She had no idea what he expected from her, or how she was supposed to navigate this strange new reality. I won't fight you, she said after a long silence, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm not going to bow down to you either. Vincent's smile widened, though it wasn't a comforting smile. I don't want you to bow down to me, Olivia, he said, leaning forward slightly. I want you to understand that. Your place is here, with me. And once you do, everything will be much easier. Olivia's mind raced as she processed his words. She didn't know what he meant by, everything will be much easier, but she could feel the weight of his gaze on her, a constant reminder that he was in control. Vincent stood and walked around the desk, stopping right in front of her. He was taller than she had realized, his presence overwhelming. For a moment, there was silence between them, thick with tension. "You'll learn to trust me, Olivia," he said quietly, his tone almost gentle. "But first, you need to understand that when you're with me, you're safe. No one can touch you." She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to say, or even what to feel. But one thing was certain, she was no longer in control of her life. Not in the way she had been before. She was in Vincent Gambino's world now, and the rules were different here. "You're not as alone as you think," he added, as if reading her mind. "And soon, you'll see that this is where you were always meant to be." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know if she believed him, but she had no choice but to stay. As Vincent stepped back, his gaze never left hers, and she realized, for the first time, that there was no turning back. Olivia woke to the sound of soft footsteps echoing in the hallway. She had barely slept, her mind restless with thoughts of what Vincent had said to her the night before. "You belong to me now," those words played over and over in her head like a song she couldn't escape. It wasn't just a statement, it was a binding promise, a contract she had no choice but to accept. Sitting up in bed, she glanced around the room. The bed was large, luxurious, and completely different from the cramped space she had called home just a few days ago. Everything in the room was meticulously arranged, the dark wood furniture and plush carpet making the space feel even more alien. The lavishness of it all seemed surreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life. And yet, here she was, unable to escape, unable to go back to the life she had known. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Before she could respond, the door creaked open, and in stepped one of Vincent's staff, a tall woman in a neat black uniform. "Mr. Gambino requests your presence downstairs," the woman said, her voice polite but firm. Olivia nodded, unsure of what to expect. She had no idea what Vincent wanted from her now. Slowly, she stood and walked to the bathroom. She splashed cold water on her face, trying to shake off the fog that clung to her mind. It was hard to concentrate on anything when her thoughts kept drifting back to him. Vincent. The man who had so easily taken control of her life without asking for permission. The man who had made it clear that there was no escaping his world. When Olivia entered the grand staircase, she hesitated. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. It felt like every step she took echoed in the vast space around her. She made her way downstairs, following the quiet whispers of the staff that went about their work. When she reached the bottom, she found Vincent standing in front of the large fireplace in the main room, his back to her. He didn't turn when he heard her footsteps. "I need you to understand something, Olivia." Vincent's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something sharp. She didn't answer, unsure of what he wanted her to say. "This is not a game. You've been brought here for a reason," he continued, his eyes finally meeting hers. There was no warmth in his gaze, only the cold weight of authority. "I don't do things halfway, and neither should you." Olivia swallowed, the tension between them thickening with every word. "I'm not here to be your pawn," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the unease swirling inside her. "You're not a pawn," Vincent replied, his lips curling slightly, as if he were amused by her defiance. "You're much more than that." His words made her shiver, but she couldn't tell whether it was fear or something else. She didn't know him, and yet there was something about him that made her feel both trapped and strangely safe at the same time. "I don't need you to understand everything right now," Vincent said, walking toward her, his footsteps deliberate. "But I do need you to trust me." Olivia wanted to argue, to tell him that trust was earned, not demanded. But the words stuck in her throat. She had no choice but to play along for now, to survive this new reality. "I can't trust you," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent stopped in front of her, his gaze unwavering. "You will," he said simply, the finality in his voice making her wonder if she had any say in the matter at all. The air between them was thick with tension, but Olivia refused to let him see how much it affected her. She had to remain strong, even if it meant staying in this world she had never asked for. "Now," Vincent said, breaking the silence, "let's see how you handle the rest of the day." Olivia nodded, unsure of what was to come, but certain of one thing: this was just the beginning. Olivia stood silently in front of the massive windows, her eyes tracing the skyline of the city outside. The view was stunning, but it felt hollow. Nothing felt real anymore. She had been here for days now, in Vincent's world, and every moment seemed to blur together. The mansion was beautiful, no doubt, but it held a heaviness she couldn't shake off. Every time she walked through its halls, it felt like something was closing in on her, a constant reminder that she was no longer in control of her own life. Vincent had made it clear that she belonged to him now. He wasn't a man of words, his actions spoke louder than any promises or threats. Yet, despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. There was something about him, something dangerous and captivating, that kept her in place, like a moth to a flame. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her thoughts. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Vincent. You're still awake," he said softly, his voice steady but with a note of something unspoken. Olivia didn't respond, but she didn't turn away either. His presence was so commanding that it filled the space even when he didn't say anything. He stood behind her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. "I never thought you'd be so quiet," he finally said, his tone almost curious. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm just trying to figure things out," she replied quietly. "You're here now," Vincent said, moving closer. She could feel the heat of his body even without him touching her. "You don't need to figure anything out. You just need to trust me." Olivia's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had heard them before, but they meant something different this time. There was no threat, no force in his voice, just a quiet certainty. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, even though everything in her wanted to resist. He had a way of speaking, of being, that made her question everything she thought she knew. "Trust you?" Olivia repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "How am I supposed to trust you after everything?" Vincent's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "Because you have no choice," he replied, his voice low and unwavering. "You're in this world now, Olivia. And in this world, trust is everything. Without it, we're nothing." Olivia's mind raced. She wanted to argue, to tell him that trust couldn't be forced, that it had to be earned. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew it wasn't that simple. This wasn't about right or wrong, it was about survival. And in Vincent's world, survival meant following his rules. She turned to face him, meeting his gaze. "And what happens if I don't trust you?" she asked, her voice trembling but defiant. Vincent didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, closing the distance between them until there was only a breath separating them. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of his presence. "You will," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because you need me more than you think." Olivia wanted to pull away, to distance herself from him, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, as if he could see into her very soul. Or maybe it was the truth in his words, because deep down, she knew he was right. As much as she wanted to deny it, she was in his world now, and she had to find a way to survive it. For better or worse, Vincent Gambino had a hold on her, and there was nothing she could do to break free. "Come with me," he said, his voice commanding once more. Olivia didn't hesitate this time. She knew what he wanted, and she knew she had no choice but to follow. As she walked beside him, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. She had no idea what Vincent's plans were, but one thing was certain: her life would never be the same again. Olivia followed Vincent through the grand hallway, her footsteps barely making a sound on the polished floors. She had long since stopped trying to understand the world she had been thrown into. Everything about this place was unfamiliar: the luxury, the power, the quiet that seemed to pervade every room. The house felt like a fortress, each door a barrier, each hallway a corridor that led deeper into Vincent's world. They reached a door at the end of the hall, and Vincent paused, turning to face her. His eyes held hers with that same intensity that had disarmed her from the moment they met. "You're not just here for the ride, Olivia," he said, his voice steady, but with an undertone she couldn't quite place. "I need you to understand that you are a part of this now. There's no turning back." Olivia didn't say anything. She couldn't. She had heard him before, his words were clear, his meaning even clearer. She was in this world, whether she wanted to be or not. Vincent opened the door, revealing a study, the walls lined with books and artwork. It was warm in here, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting a welcoming light over the room. Vincent motioned for her to sit, and she obeyed without thinking. The chair was comfortable, too comfortable, but it felt out of place for someone like her. She didn't belong here, not in this world, not in this house. But still, she stayed. He moved behind the desk, sitting in the large leather chair that looked like it had been made for someone who controlled everything around them. "I want you to understand the gravity of what we're doing here," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've been brought here because you have something I need." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice betraying the uncertainty she was trying so hard to hide. Vincent's smile was small, almost imperceptible, but there was something in it that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. "You're more than just a pawn, Olivia," he said, his voice low. "You're a partner. But first, you need to realize what that means. This is bigger than you, bigger than me. We're in this together, whether you like it or not." Olivia stared at him, trying to process his words. She had never asked for this, never wanted any part of it, but here she was, stuck in a world she didn't understand, with a man who made it clear that he wasn't going to let her go. The tension between them thickened, and she could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on her. "I didn't ask for this," she said, finally finding her voice, though it trembled with emotion. "I didn't ask for any of it." Vincent leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "None of us ask for this, Olivia. But sometimes life doesn't give us a choice. Sometimes, we're thrust into situations we never saw coming." He stood, walking slowly around the desk to where she sat. His presence loomed over her, but there was no aggression in his movements, just quiet power, as though he had the world at his fingertips and nothing could stand in his way. "You don't have to like it," he continued, his voice softening just enough for her to hear the sincerity in it. "But you do have to accept it. You're here now. And you're with me. And that's something you'll learn to live with." Olivia swallowed, the words hitting her harder than she expected. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of him or the world she had been dragged into. She had no control, no escape, no way out. But somehow, in that moment, she realized that she didn't need to escape anymore. She had already made her choice the moment she stepped into his world. "I'm not here to be controlled," she said, her voice steadier now, the defiance in her words returning. Vincent's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "You'll learn that control is an illusion," he said quietly. "And in time, you'll see that there is freedom in it, in letting go of the things you think you control." Olivia's thoughts were a whirlwind, but one thing was clear. She was in deeper than she ever imagined. She wasn't just a player in his game, she was part of it now, whether she liked it or not. Olivia stood in front of the large window, staring out at the city below. The view was breathtaking, but it felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. A life she could never have again. Everything had changed. She had been in Vincent's world for over a week now, and each day seemed to blur into the next. She was living in his mansion, surrounded by luxury, but the feeling of being trapped never left her. She couldn't escape the weight of his words, "You belong to me now." It wasn't just a statement, it was a fact. She was here, in this house, in this life, because Vincent had decided it was so. He didn't give her a choice. The thought made her stomach churn. She was no longer in control of her own life. Vincent had claimed her, and now she had to figure out how to survive in a world that wasn't hers. She didn't know what he wanted from her or what the future held, but one thing was certain, she was part of his world now. Olivia was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't hear Vincent approach until he was standing beside her. His presence was unmistakable, his quiet confidence filling the space between them. "You're thinking too much," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. She didn't look at him but could feel his gaze on her. "I'm trying to understand this, all of this," she said, her voice betraying the frustration she had been keeping inside. Vincent's lips curled into a small smile. "You won't understand it. Not yet. But you will in time." She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And how long is that supposed to take?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Vincent didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He simply stared at her, his gaze unwavering. "As long as it takes," he replied, his voice low but firm. "It's not about understanding, Olivia. It's about acceptance. You're here now. You're part of this world whether you like it or not." Olivia clenched her fists at her sides, trying to keep her composure. "And what exactly is this world?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, and she could feel the heat of his body, the magnetic pull of his presence. "This world," he began, "is about power, control, and loyalty. It's a world where rules are made, not followed. Where survival depends on strength, and weakness is something that can be exploited. And in this world, Olivia, you have to decide where you stand. Whether you fight or accept." Olivia swallowed hard, trying to process his words. She had never thought about life like that, everything had always seemed so clear before. She had worked hard, fought to make a life for herself, but now she realized that none of that mattered. This was a different game entirely, and Vincent was the one holding the cards. "So, what happens to me if I don't accept?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt. Vincent's gaze softened, just for a moment. "You don't have to accept, Olivia. But understand this, you'll never be free again. Not unless you choose to be. And that choice is yours. But I can promise you this, you won't survive this world without me." The finality of his words left her breathless. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew he was right. She was already too deep, too far in to turn back now. Olivia was trapped in his world, and there was no easy way out. "I'm not sure I want to be here," she said quietly, the words almost feeling like a confession. Vincent didn't respond at first. He just stood there, looking at her with those eyes that seemed to see everything. "You don't have to want it, Olivia," he said at last, his voice quiet but firm. "But you're here, and that's the first step. The rest will come in time. And when it does, you'll understand why you're here." Olivia didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she wanted to understand. She didn't know if she could ever accept this life. But as Vincent turned and walked away, she realized that, for better or worse, she was in it now. And there was no turning back. Olivia stood at the window, her mind racing as she watched the city lights flicker below. The stillness of the mansion was overwhelming. It was like living inside a bubble, a world apart from everything she had ever known. She had spent the past few days trying to adjust to Vincent's world, but nothing felt familiar. Every room, every hallway seemed to mock her sense of freedom, reminding her that she was no longer in control of her life. She didn't know why she had agreed to stay. Perhaps it was the fear of what would happen if she left, or maybe it was something deeper, something she wasn't ready to face yet. She was trapped, and she knew it. The decision had already been made for her. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Vincent, even though every part of her wanted to run. He had a power over her, one that she couldn't explain. And the more she tried to resist, the stronger it became. Vincent had told her time and time again that she belonged to him, but what did that even mean? Was it about control? Or was it something more? She didn't know. The door to the room opened behind her, and she heard Vincent's voice before she saw him. "I see you're still avoiding me," he said, his tone calm, but there was a sharpness to it that made her turn. She faced him, but said nothing. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, there was silence between them. It wasn't the awkward silence of two people who didn't know what to say. It was the silence of two people who knew exactly what was at stake, but were waiting for one to break first. Finally, Olivia spoke. "I'm not avoiding you," she said, her voice steady, but the unease in her chest betrayed her. "I'm just thinking." Vincent didn't seem convinced. He walked toward her, closing the distance between them until he was standing only a few feet away. "You're thinking too much," he said softly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You can't think your way out of this, Olivia. You're already here." He paused, and Olivia could feel the weight of his words settle around them like a thick fog. "You can fight it all you want, but in the end, you'll realize that this is the only place you were ever meant to be." Olivia clenched her jaw, refusing to let him see how much his words stung. "You don't get to decide that for me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not yours. I never was." Vincent's expression softened, just a little, but it wasn't enough to ease the tension between them. He reached out, placing a hand on the back of her chair, his fingers brushing against the fabric. "I don't need to decide it for you, Olivia. You've already made that choice," he said quietly. "You're here because you're meant to be here. And whether you like it or not, I'll help you see that." Olivia swallowed, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She wanted to deny it, to tell him that she had no part in this life, no part in whatever he was trying to create. But deep down, she knew he was right. She couldn't escape. She was already part of his world, and there was no way to turn back. She looked away, her gaze drifting back to the city lights outside the window. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling despite herself. Vincent's lips curled into a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I want you to accept what you are. What we are," he said softly. "Once you do that, everything will fall into place. You'll see that this life, this world, is where you belong." Olivia felt a shiver run through her, but she refused to let it show. She didn't know what the future held, or if she would ever accept the life Vincent had laid out for her. But one thing was certain, her path was no longer her own. And there was nothing she could do to change that. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being swallowed whole by the life Vincent had thrust upon her. Every day seemed to stretch endlessly, like an invisible force keeping her locked in this gilded cage. The mansion, once impressive, now felt like a prison. The luxuries that once seemed to glitter and gleam with promise now only served to remind her of her loss of freedom. She was stuck in a world she didn't want to be in, with a man who insisted that she belonged to him. She could feel the weight of his presence everywhere she went, even when he wasn't there. It was like a shadow she couldn't escape, following her, always looming. Yet, despite everything, part of her couldn't help but wonder if Vincent was right. Could she really deny that she was in this world now? Could she pretend that she still had control when, in reality, she had already given up any semblance of it the moment she stepped into his life? She didn't know the answer, but she knew that she couldn't keep living in this state of constant uncertainty. One evening, as she sat by the window, lost in her thoughts, Vincent appeared at the door of the study. She hadn't heard him come in, but the moment he stepped into the room, it was as if everything else faded into the background. "You're still here," he said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it. She turned to face him, unable to hide the frustration that had built up over the past few days. "I don't know why I'm still here," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I feel like I'm losing myself." Vincent studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You're not losing yourself," he said quietly. "You're finding yourself. But it's going to take time, Olivia. You can't rush it." His words stung more than she expected. She had hoped for something different, something more tangible, something that would give her a sense of control. But instead, she was left with more questions, more uncertainty. "I don't want this life," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't ask for any of this." Vincent walked closer, stopping just in front of her. His gaze was intense, and for a moment, Olivia felt like he could see right through her. "You don't get to choose, Olivia," he said, his voice low and steady. "This world chose you. And now, you have to decide what to do with it." She wanted to argue, to tell him that she still had the right to make her own choices. But in that moment, she couldn't find the words. She was tired, exhausted by the constant struggle. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice breaking. Vincent reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder, the touch surprisingly gentle. "You don't have to do it alone," he said softly. "You're not as alone as you think." Olivia looked up at him, unsure of what to feel. She had never felt so conflicted in her life. On one hand, there was a part of her that wanted to run, to escape from everything that Vincent represented. But on the other hand, there was something else, a pull, an undeniable connection that kept her from walking away. "I'm not sure I can trust you," she said, her voice barely audible. Vincent's gaze softened, and for the first time since she met him, he seemed almost vulnerable. "You don't have to trust me, Olivia. But you have to trust yourself. You have to believe that you're stronger than you think." The words hung in the air between them, and Olivia felt a flicker of something deep inside her. She didn't know if it was hope or something else, but for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to survive in this world. Maybe, she could find a way to carve out a place for herself, even if it meant accepting the things she couldn't control. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But I can't keep pretending I have all the answers." Vincent nodded, his expression unreadable. "No one has all the answers," he said, his voice low. "But sometimes, you have to trust that the answers will come when the time is right." Olivia took a deep breath, letting the weight of his words sink in. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure, her life had changed, and there was no going back. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a terrible thing.